Okay, so the three other attributes of this simple business model, the first one being revenue model. Revenue model, simply speaking, is how does the business generate sales? How does that happen? Now, when I've asked my class this in the past, the easy answer is we're going to sell the particular product. Okay? But what does selling the product mean? Does that mean selling it for cash? Does it mean selling it for credit? Providing the credit? Does it mean selling it on time, meaning overtime? Does it mean installment payments? Does it mean subscription? Does it mean leasing? Does it mean giving certain aspects away for free and charging for other aspects? What does your revenue model actually mean? There are countless different ways in which you can generate revenue. I just mentioned a few. Secondly, is the production model. So when I say, how are you going to produce your product or service? The answer is, well, we're going to make it. Okay. I would say this, that building factories to make products these days is something that you probably don't want to do. And if you have to raise money, investors are not going to give you any money to build a factory. There are plenty of factories around that you can rent, that you can lease. There's a company, they were making chips, computer chips, a new kind of computer chip. And Intel spends, at this particular time, they were spending $2 billion to build a chip fabrication plant. So you know that a startup was not going to get close to the money it required just to build a chip plant. So what it did was it rented a factory that IBM had that makes chips that wasn't running as 24/7. Okay. So you can decide to make your product or service, but you probably can use other partners to actually do it. Okay. The other alternative, of course, is to outsource. But it's not sufficient to just say we're going to outsource production. When you talk about outsourcing, I want to know who you're going to outsource it to. What country? Why? In that country, what specific sort of vendors and suppliers? More importantly, I want to know, what are you going to outsource? Are you outsourcing the entire process? Are you outsourcing design? Or are you keeping design and outsource component manufacture? And if you outsource component manufacture, does that mean assembly? Or are you going to do assembly in Sweden or the U.S., your home country? How exactly are you going to manage this process? Production in a networked organization, meaning one that's not owned, but one that uses partners from around the world. How do you manage that? Do you have those skills? Managing companies to produce products that are intricate is a very challenging job. How do I know you can do that? Sorry about that. And that's just with products. We have to produce services as well. People assume that services are very simple to produce. Services can be complex. Let's just, for example, take a simple, quote-unquote, consulting business. Okay. Do we hire the consultants? So they're employees? Or do we have a hands-off, independent contractor relationship with them? How do we do it? How do we produce the service? Do they produce it using our methods, or do they use their own methods? And if they use their own methods, and they're not hired by us, how does that make a company at all? What are we actually selling? How are we adding value? A couple of interesting service model innovation. When I was in China, mainland China, some years ago, we went to a fish restaurant. I'm not a big fish person, but I was the guest of honor. We went to a major fish restaurant, the best fish restaurant in the province. And you go in there, and the first floor is like a football field filled with fish tanks with all sorts of sea creatures in the fish tanks. And then you go upstairs for the traditional restaurant. So you go upstairs into the traditional restaurant. And of course the idea is that the fish are downstairs. You get the freshest fish imaginable. But what I found out, which was very interesting, is that the vendors selling fish downstairs were independent of the restaurant. So the vendors would sell the cooks on why they should buy that particular fish from them that day, and then they would cook it and sell it. So there was a disconnect between the source of supply, like it normally was, but they were put together in one facility. That's really interesting. Restaurant production. Or if you look at they don't have them in Europe as much. In the U.S., they have become pretty big. I've traveled back to the U.S. a number of times, and they seem to be pretty big. Is these buffet restaurants, where it's basically all you can eat, but there's no waitresses and things. So again, what they've done is they've reduced their labor costs, which is a substantial cost in running a restaurant. So the fact that balances out the cost or any cost of increased food. A different way to deliver the restaurant service. Or many, many years ago in the late 70s, and I went to California, we went to a Japanese restaurant, but it was not a Japanese restaurant as we might today, but it was a hibachi Japanese restaurant. And so each of us had a grill in front of us, and they brought our food raw. And we had to cook the food ourselves. Now, what was great about that is you had total control over the food. One, it's built-in entertainment as well. But on the price side, it was the same price as any sort of other restaurant. But there was no chef. The food was raw. Huge, huge margins on something like that. So rethinking how you produce your product or service, can be very powerful. Delivery model. We talk about a delivery model. I'm talking about how your product and service is delivered. Well, I'm talking about classical marketing. It's basically everything that happens from the production onto the customer. So that includes distribution and promotion and advertising and that sort of thing. How many different ways do you deliver it? Are you going to sell it face to face? All right. To sell it face to face, are you going to have a salesperson? Are you going to be in-house salespeople, or you're going to use independent sales agents? Are you going to sell it wholesale? Are you going to own the wholesale unit? Is it going to be one wholesale operation or a chain of wholesale operations? Are you going to sell it retail, a single store, or multiple stores? Is it digital delivery? Many, many different ways in which you can deliver a product. How are you going to promote it? How are you going to advertise it? So if we look at this and say that, just for argument's sake, that we have developed 10 different potential revenue models, 10 different production models, and 10 different delivery models, how many different business models do we need to look at? or do we have to choose from? You math whizzes, come on. 1,000. Now, that doesn't mean that all 1,000 are unique. That doesn't mean all 1,000 will even work. But the point is, you see that there are many, many, many potential different business models in any circumstance that you're in. And any one of these can revolutionize the industry. Any one of these can give you a competitive advantage. Any one of these can get the high margins that you want. Any one of these can be the point of differentiation. Remember, our product and service can be the same as the product and service our competitors are selling, but we just mix up how we earn revenue, or we mix up how we produce it, or we mix up how we deliver it, or we mix up a combination of the three. Or we just tweak the value proposition. So when you're thinking about your product or service, okay, we have the idea kernel. We looked at customer space. Okay, now we're looking at the business model. All of these things interact, as we said before. All of these things should cause you to reevaluate the customer, reevaluate the idea proposition. Do we need to tweak it? Do we need to change it? As we start moving towards a more finalized concept in this opportunity development process. Value proposition, revenue model, production model, delivery model. How do all these things work together? Okay, good. Let's stop that. Stop right here. I'm taking time to go through this business model section because it is, as I said, it's really where the value is these days, and it's challenging to come up with unique products and services, but you don't have to. All you need to do is come up with ways in which you can deliver value propositions that customers want, and by tweaking and playing with the revenue model, the production model, and delivery model, that oftentimes is the best way to get there. Okay. So let's take a break here, and we'll come back with the next section.